Okay, so the same administration that ran on bringing American manufacturing back is now sitting in Congress explaining why they're torching the value of your paycheck. Wisconsin farmers losing entire export markets. Working families paying a hidden inflation tax on every grocery run. And the U.S. Trade Representative, he just shrugged. This past Wednesday, April 22nd, Rep. Gwen Moore sat across from Trump's trade rep, Jamieson Greer, and asked him the one question nobody else had the spine to ask. Are you deliberately trying to devalue the dollar? Just like that, straight up. Watch how he reacts. Clip's about 5 minutes. Subscribe right now so you don't miss the breakdown after. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for spending all this time with the Ways and Means Committee. I want to associate myself with comments that were made earlier by our chairman, Mr. Smith, that AGOA is very important to us. We want you to work with us in renewing it. We should. This is something that is a bipartisan ask, and I just want to associate myself with that. I also want to say that I'm from Wisconsin, sir, and even though I represent Milwaukee and the surrounding urban areas, I am feeling the impacts in lots of conversations about our farmers, our soybean farmers who have seen their markets destroyed with USAID being shut down and the markets in China closing down. And I understand that we're probably going to be looking at some trade adjustment assistance for them, for farmers. But farmers don't want these welfare checks. It's not well and it's not fair. They want their markets back. And I think this gives, I want you to think about this, I think it gives China a lot of leverage over us. I'm really concerned. You said here today that you were not a free trade person. And I don't know that I am either, but I'm a fair trade person, which I think is where all of us ought to be. And it seems to me that the president, and you support him as the trade representative, want to impose these tariffs with the hope that it's going to bring manufacturing jobs back. Number one, I haven't seen any industrial policy from the White House that would support that. All I see is trade, these tariffs, and threats. I have absolutely no idea where you're getting the numbers from, because factories are continuing to shed workers. We lost 98,000 manufacturing jobs just during the first year of the president's second term. So the question I have are, with this strategy, we're going to see a devaluation of the dollar, which of course will continue to raise prices for Americans, to deindustrialize. Are you deliberately trying to devalue the dollar?
No, that's an interesting question.
But that's what's going to happen.
Well, I think, listen, first of all, the value of the dollar, whether it's weak or strong, it's relative to other currencies in other countries. So there are also, if you export overseas and the dollar is lower relative to that, you can actually export more effectively. And we're exporting more than we've exported in American history. On the trade policy issue, Congresswoman, I agree with you on fair trade and focusing on manufacturing. On January 20th, we put out a trade policy that was focused on manufacturing. And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you might agree with me that some of our trade policies in the past actually led to offshoring to Mexico or China or places like that. And so if there was a bad trade policy that could lead to offshoring, good trade policy can lead to onshoring.
Well, I appreciate your sentiments, but like I said, there's no industrial policy to enable manufacturers to stand up where we've been in the 70s or 80s. You spoke a little bit about, we talked about depreciating the dollar, and you constantly talk about our trade deficit account, but you talked about our exporting to Europe. Don't we run a surplus in the capital and financial accounts? The IMF has put together a balance of payments, and so it's kind of disingenuous to just call this a trade deficit when you consider the balance of payments. Am I wrong about that?
I think you are. I think that, you can find some economists from like Cato, super libertarians, who want to go with you on that. I'm not in that camp. I'm more concerned in looking at the trade deficit in goods, where we're at $1.2 trillion in the hole following Biden years. I'm looking at our net investment position, where foreign countries have higher claims on U.S. assets than Americans have on claim on foreign assets. That's a dangerous position to be in. There are sub-accounts you can look at. I'm happy to have more conversation with you on this. I think we're probably more aligned.
Because I went with the chairman to Madagascar, and we have an awful trade deficit with Madagascar. But I look around at all those poor people, and I think, well, duh, they sell us vanilla, but we have a trade deficit. And so we would have a broader conversation. I'd appreciate that, because I think that this trade policy of this administration is going to continue to raise prices for Americans. We're sowing into a dream of reindustrializing, and I fear that it's just going to put us in a situation where we're not able to pay workers more, where we're hoping and praying for an event that may not occur. But I appreciate your patience and your indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Smucker. I yield back.
All right, so let's talk about what just happened. Because if you watched that and felt your stomach drop a little, yeah, that's the right reaction. The U.S. Trade Representative, the guy whose entire job is defending American economic interests, couldn't give a straight answer about whether his own boss is sabotaging the currency. Couldn't, or wouldn't. And the silence in that room after Moore asked the question, that's the loudest answer you'll get on Capitol Hill all year. And let's start where this hits hardest. Wisconsin soybean farmers, Iowa corn growers, the same Midwest families who lost their China market the first time around. Retaliatory tariffs hit, exports collapsed, and instead of fixing the policy, the answer was bailout checks, $28 billion in farm subsidies during the first trade war, according to USDA. $28 billion to paper over a wound the policy itself created. And farmers keep saying it out loud. They don't want welfare. They want their markets back. You don't cut someone's leg off, hand them a Band-Aid, and call that an economic strategy. That's damage control with a press release. Now, here's where it gets, honestly, kind of insulting. Because Greer sat there and tried to sell the idea that the pain is temporary, short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. Just trust the process. Meanwhile, farm bankruptcies are up double digits year over year. Soybean exports to China are down nearly half from peak. And Greer's pitch is, hey, give it time. Tell that to a fourth-generation farmer watching the auction sign go up in his front yard. And this is where Moore went straight for the throat, because the part Greer really didn't want to answer is the dollar. Democratic leaders have been sounding the alarm for months that the administration is quietly trying to weaken the dollar to make exports look competitive on paper. Sounds smart in a corporate boardroom. Catastrophic at the grocery store. A weaker dollar means everything you import costs more. Gas, electronics, clothes, food. That's a hidden inflation tax. And according to the Peterson Institute, the average American household pays an extra $1,200 a year from these tariffs alone. $1,200 out of your pocket. The promise was American greatness. The receipt is a smaller paycheck. And the part that really should sting. When Moore asked Greer point blank whether devaluation was the strategy, he wouldn't say no. He couldn't say no, because saying no on the record would contradict everything Trump has been hinting at on Truth Social. So he gave the bureaucratic answer, the non-answer, the we don't comment on the dollar answer. That's the polite way of admitting the quiet part is the loud part now. And let's zoom out. Because this isn't just an American story anymore. By alienating allies and blowing up the global supply chains we spent 80 years building, we created a vacuum. And vacuums get filled. China is locking in expanded trade deals across Latin America. The EU is fast-tracking agreements in Southeast Asia. Everyone is hedging away from the United States in real time. And despite all the tough guy tariff talk, the U.S. trade deficit in goods is still sitting at $1.2 trillion. A trillion, with a T. So what did the strategy actually accomplish? Higher prices for you, lost markets for farmers. Allies walking, a deficit that didn't move, that's not winning, that's burning the kitchen down because you didn't like the recipe. And here's what nobody on that committee said out loud, but everybody in the room knew. This isn't an accident, this is a choice. The administration knows farmers are bleeding. They know consumers are paying the inflation tax. They know allies are walking away. And they're doing it anyway because the politics of looking tough on trade matters more to them than the math of whether any of it actually works. That's not economic strategy. That's a tantrum with a tariff schedule attached. So here's the line. Next time someone tries to tell you tariffs are protecting American workers, hit them with the receipt. $1,200 a year out of every household, $28 billion in farm bailouts to cover the damage from the policy itself, a $1.2 trillion trade deficit that didn't move an inch, and a trade rep who couldn't even tell Congress whether gutting the dollar was the plan. That's not strength. That's a demolition project being sold as a renovation. If this helped you connect the dots, hit the like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the full picture. I'll see you in the next one.